Hello, everybody. My name is Curtis, and I'm here with the Library of American Comics on LOAC-TV, Library of American Comics Television, here streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. We're going to be talking today about this classic right here, Secret Agent X-9. But before we get to that, before I introduce our special guest, I just want to mention that you can sign up. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel if you would want to get more updates or be alerted when we are going to do more of these videos. You can subscribe to our newsletter by going to libraryofamericancomics.com, and also follow us on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter. Just look for LOA Comics. We also have a Facebook group called the Library of American Comics Newspaper Strip Appreciation Group. It's kind of a long title, but we talk about newspaper comic strips, the classic stuff, all day long. So feel free to sign up for that on Facebook and join the conversation. Okay, so today we have a very special guest. I want to welcome to the show the Library of American Comics Associate Editor, Bruce Canwell. Hi, Bruce.
Hi-ho, everyone. This is all very 21st century.
Yeah, I was saying to you the other day is that you've been on our podcast and people read your essays in the books, but we don't get a lot of kind of face-to-face time. So it's cool that you are here with us on this live stream, on this live stream video today.
And after they've seen me and heard me for a while, they're going to be glad that that is the case.
Well, we'll see. We'll try and keep it interesting for everybody who's out there watching. If you are watching and you're watching us live on Facebook or on YouTube, you can leave a comment and we'll see your comments here. We'll try and address any questions you have. If you just want to say hi to Bruce, you're more than welcome to say hi to Bruce. But we love the interaction, so feel free to leave us your comments and reflections if you are a fan of Secret Agent X-9 or whatever else you want to talk about. So today, I asked you, Bruce, which book do you want to talk about? And after a little back and forth about a couple of different ideas, we settled on Secret Agent X-9. Why did you decide to pick this book?
A handful of reasons. First of all, X-9 is a standalone within our line, but it is related because we did publish the Secret Agent Corrigans later in from the 1960s and 70s by Archie Goodwin and Al Williamson, and later by a volume by George Evans. And it's the same strip. It just ran for a long time. So since we were running things very late in the Corrigan run, Dean and I thought it would be a great idea to go back and do the start of Corrigan, which is, of course, X-9. And we could do it all in one standalone book. And it is, we had already done, so there's thought one. Thought two was we had already been doing Flash Gordon and Jungle Jim by Alex Raymond, and X-9 starts concurrent with those strips.
Right.
Jungle Jim was a Sunday topper for Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon at the time was only a Sunday page. X-9 was Raymond's daily strip. And so by collecting all of the early X-9, we were in a position to have all of that inaugural Alex Raymond that launched his career as a quote unquote name cartoonist.
Right.
We would have that all in print under our umbrella. So it just seemed to make a lot of sense.
Now, in your introduction, you even mentioned that this was kind of the last puzzle piece in Raymond's career that had left to be published, that for scholars to look at and all that kind of stuff. Very, very neat that, and it goes, the stuff that the Library of American Comics has published of Raymond goes beyond just his credited work. Like you've also done Blondie, the stuff you did on there, and Tim Tyler.
Tyler's Luck, yes.
So it's quite comprehensive if you are a big Alex Raymond fan to have it kind of all under one umbrella like this. Very nice.
That's it. One-stop shopping. We like that.
Tell me a little bit about the creation of Secret Agent X-9. I don't want to give away too much of what is in your essay because it's a very interesting read. I learned a lot from there, but for the sake of our conversation, let's talk a little bit about the origins of this comic strip.
Well, the origin of X-9, just like the origin of Flash and Jungle Jim, comes because William Randolph Hearst, newspaper mogul supreme and the guiding, owner and guiding light behind King Features Syndicate,
Yep.
Was never one to let success go unchallenged. And so there had been significant success in the science fiction realm with Buck Rogers, which launched in 1929, and with Tarzan, his Jungle Adventure, which also launched in the same time. And then a few years later, with hard-boiled crime stories with Dick Tracy. And Dick Tracy, became became a smash hit very quickly. And so the Chicago Tribune New York News Syndicate was picking up clients from other papers who wanted to sign on for Tracy. Right. So Hearst recognized that all three genres represented there's gold in them Bar Hills, and Hearst was willing to try to mine some of that gold for himself. So working with King's head of the comic strip division at the time, Joe Connolly, he sort of mapped out the plans that became Flash Gordon and Jungle Jim and X-9. And one of the things that, Hearst had a fortune that made Daddy Warbucks, look like only one of the top 10 percenters rather than one of the top 1 percenters.
Yeah.
And so Hearst was known to try to land top talent. And at the time, writer Dashiell Hammett, he was just launching a career as a novelist in those years. But Hammett was really catching attention because Hammett was the creator of the hard-boiled school of detective fiction.
Right.
So now it's become a cliche, with the PI or who runs his own code of honor and lives in the seedy restaurant or the seedy office with the trench coat and the fedora and snaps off witty one-liners. It's a cliche today. It did not exist before Hammett.
Yeah.
Hammett invented the genre, and to this day remains one of the masters of the genre. Few have ever equaled him, and some of us would say none have ever topped him. So the point of this being, here came Hearst. He wanted to do something hard-hitting crime drama to challenge Dick Tracy, and he had the money, and he said to Joe Connolly, let's go get Dashiell Hammett to write this. And Dashiell Hammett, who was a splendid writer, an interesting human being. I've read, I've read all his published fiction, and I've read, I don't know, it's got to be a 700-page collection of his letters, selected letters. And Hammett was never one to shy away from a libation. And so as fast as he got his money, he spent his money, and his weakness for the grape and other forms of spirits meant that he didn't work perhaps as diligently as he should have. So here came King Features saying, hey, how'd you like to write this comic strip? And he said, sounds like steady and easy money, and he went for it. So this novelist who was really catching on as a literary darling, his work was getting, mainstream attention, and for genre fiction at the time to get mainstream attention was highly unusual.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of a synergy that here came this, King Features got this guy whose name they could exploit to help sell the strip, and he happened to need the job and said, "Yeah, okay, sign me up." And so it was a happy coincidence. And they were planning on the art side. They did extensive searching. They went through a few rounds of people delivering samples, and they settled on Alex Raymond being able to do X-9 Monday through Saturday. Oh,
Yeah.
and by the way, you can do two other strips. You can do Jungle Jim and Flash for Sundays for us. Sure, that's no problem. And Raymond, just sort of starting out to be a name cartoonist of his own. These are really his first gigs where he's not ghosting for somebody else or assisting somebody else. He said, okay, and he just buckled down to the task and did it. So
Yeah.
it really was a confluence of a lot of threads that weaved the tapestry together that turned into X-9.
Right. Wow. Let's take a little look at the construction of this book here, the way it's put together, just so people can see. I'm going to add this to the stream. Just a second. So I have removed the dust jacket just to make it easier on myself, but this is what we get, a really nice stamp on here on the cover.
Guess what? This is how I read the book. Whenever I read a book with a dust jacket on it, this is what I do. I take the dust jacket off.
Yeah, well, why ruin a nice dust jacket?
Exactly right. Why am I putting wear and tear on my dust jacket? So you're doing exactly what I would do.
Great end papers. This it looks like a ripped from the headlines here. It's really great. And then I'll take you through a little bit of the introductory stuff. Bruce, you have a nice essay that takes us through some of the stuff that we were talking about and a little bit more, with artwork from some of the earlier collections. And I found it really interesting at the very end when you're talking about Hammett. I had no idea his involvement, or is not even confirmed involvement with the Communist Party and all the trouble that got him into.
It's confirmed. He was.
Oh, is it confirmed?
Yes, it is. Yes, he had ties, but you've got to remember, a lot of people had ties, especially in the 1930s, because the Depression was on, and today we can't imagine what the Depression was like.
Yeah,
I mean, millions of people. Pandemically, there was a large surge of unemployment here recently within the last 18 months, but people had a sense that we were going to get a handle on this thing, and things would get back to normal. When in the midst of the Depression, it was so bad, nobody knew how they were going to get out of this. Right. And jobs were hard to find, money was hard to come by, and it was a black hole for a lot of people. And so there was a sense among a certain segment of the population at the time that our system was not working, and they were looking around and trying to see what else was out there that might work better. So it was not unusual for many people to investigate the communist manifesto, if you will, and there were branches, in almost, in every state and in most major cities, of Communist Party places where you could go and learn more and speak to people and get literature and etc. And so it was not unusual for people to have those connections. And of course, by the time the 1950s come around, now we've been through World War II, the Depression was long over, and here comes Joe McCarthy.
Yeah.
With his red baiting hysteria. And his congressional hearings about communist spies, and so a lot of people who got with names such as Hammett, amongst many others, got called up before his committee, and those communist ties, whether current or past, they came back to really bite them, because many people. Many creative people, many Hollywood people, and some authors and some artists found that impossible to get work afterwards because they were blacklisted as communists, even if their association with communism had ended years or even decades ago.
Right.
So they were painted with a very broad brush. So, but yes, Hammett definitely had some radical but not extreme political views.
We've got a couple of comments here. Bill just wants to say hi to you and me. Hi, Bill. How are you doing?
Hey, Bill.
And Jeff also says, hey, Bruce, thank you for all your work on the LOAC books. Your knowledge and efforts are appreciated.
Well, I appreciate that. It's great to know that folks are out there reading. Writing is much like Milton Caniff, he said that cartooning is an attic business and it's a lonely business, and writing can be the same. So, anybody who is spending their hard-earned dollar, and it's never easy to make a buck, and I understand that, but anybody who is spending a hard-earned dollar on our books is appreciated, and anybody who is finding value in the work I do, that makes it all worthwhile.
One of the things I love about this book is just watching the evolution of Raymond's art through this. Yep. I was quite surprised in reading these first stories where because he sets the camera so that we're getting full body characters in all of these strips. There's whole sequences. Let's see if I can find that. Yeah, this hallway sequence where there's a whole fight, and it's all just like wide shots and the full body characters.
Yeah, and definitely... you'll find in that same sequence, well, as a matter of fact, right where you are, he would use what I'm calling, what I think I refer to as widescreen panels.
CinemaScope,
yeah, exactly, because most comics were divided into 3 or 4 panels. And in this sequence, the last panel in the strip above, and then the middle strip that you're looking at, he's basically taking up 2 panels worth of space in order to present 1 panel's worth of imagery. And that was, at the time, radical thinking to do that type of widescreen sort of work.
His staging is so great in all of this. Like, the camera is pretty steady in terms of where it's placed here, but you can just see the action, the movement, progression between the panels. It's really, really quite fantastic. No wonder he became a rising star really fast, because the way he does this is just great. And there's one, I'm going to skip ahead to see if I can find, there's one panel in this cowboy story where he's on a motorcycle, and oh yeah, there's also this dogfight here. It's just incredible. Got to find this. Because
you're in the neighborhood, I think.
Well, he's on a motorcycle a lot in this story, but there's one part where he goes right here, this one right here. So he's oops, sideways, sorry, just a sec. He's riding down this guy's on this car is chasing him. They're riding down the road, and in this one panel here, it says X-9's motorcycle skids wildly to a stop, and the killers make their getaway. So in this one panel, we're showing the action of skidding, coming to a stop, and then also these guys flying past and then flying over the cliff here. Just so much action in one panel, and it reads really well because you read it left to right, and so you get the full flow of what's going on. It's just such a great use of comics right there.
Yeah, and Raymond throughout his career was always a master at structuring his imagery to lead the eye where he wanted it to go.
Yes.
There's very little ambiguity in Raymond's throughout his career. And to Rip Kirby and even the illustration work that he did. He's taking you through an image, and he structures everything with a purpose to help the narrative flow that he's imposing on the structure. And he's always been a master at that.
And that's one of the things you mentioned in your essay that was a difficulty between him and Hammett, because he said that Hammett did not have the sense of how to write for a comic strip. So there's always the problem of, Hammett would give a string of dialogue, but it wouldn't flow in the way that the characters are set up in the panel and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's that is a time-honored push and pull between writers and artists in comics. Well, here you go. A little story from my own past, way in my past now. In the late 90s, I did some work for DC Comics, and my good friend, the stellar artist Lee Weeks, and I did a Batman graphic novel called Batman the Gauntlet.
Right.
And there's the standard, there's a page where Gordon brings Batman with the bat signal. So we have already jumped to that. The page starts with Gordon and Batman together, sharded by the bat signal. And so it's signal at panel left, Gordon standing underneath just underneath and to our right of the bat signal, and Batman standing to the right of him. So, and then there's a whole batch of open space to the right of Batman that I could use for dialogue. The problem was I needed Gordon to be speaking first. And there was the bat signal, and you didn't want to crowd the bat signal.
Yeah.
And you didn't want to be putting word balloons over people's heads or blocking parts of people's bodies. And it was like, well, but the imagery was so beautiful that, you're going to find a way to make it work. So I just structured the panels. So, I structured the word balloons so that Gordon's balloon is over here on panel right, even though he's over here on panel left, and it's a mighty long tail on that word balloon to get in there. But you've got to work with what you've got, and so sometimes it's the artist draws something, and it's like, yeah, but didn't you see that I had this guy speaking for it? And it's like, well, okay, we'll find a way to make it work. And I think
that's right.
For Raymond, it was somewhat of the reverse. Hammett was a prose novelist. He had never done comics before, and he just kind of figured, I'm sure he just kind of figured, it's easy to do. I'm writing novels, comic strips. This is just, at the time, people said comics are junk literature. So he's like, I'm slumming while I'm doing this. I'm just going to bat it out, and it'll all work. Well, it all worked, but some of making that work fell onto Raymond's shoulders. And here's a guy who had a crushing workload. No matter how young and eager he was, it was a crushing workload. And then it's like, here, figure this out too. I'm sure he didn't appreciate having to spend even more time, smoothing out the rough edges, because Hammett's reputation was assured. Raymond's reputation, there was no guarantee whether people would love him or hate him at this stage of the game in 1934, 1935.
That's right. I'm skipping ahead in the book to about the halfway mark. You can see there, because this is where Raymond's art becomes, I think, a little bit more what it's known for, at least in his Flash Gordon sense. You get a lot more of his style of shading in the background, and more kind of a noir even style of drawing.
Well, and I think you'll see too that in the early stages, when he was ghosting Tim Tyler's luck, and early on, especially in X-9, but even Flash and Jungle Jim, Raymond was very influenced early on by two illustrators, magazine illustrators and book illustrators, the Clark brothers, Matt and Benton Clark, and he was especially influenced by Matt Clark. So if you went out to Google and you took a look at Google Images and you Googled Matt Clark's name, and you look at some of the work he does, the leading men that Matt Clark created, the poses, the attitudes, the acting of his figures, and you look at X-9 and you look at the early Jungle Jims and Flash Gordons, and there is no doubt that it's not like Raymond was, cheating, but everybody has influences, and Raymond was heavily influenced, and he said, this is what I want my work to look like. And then as time went on and he became more knowledgeable and more assured, and he understood more about the business, and he understood the possibilities within the medium, that his style just naturally evolved. And guess what? That happens to everybody. You can name anyone, any major figure, and and their styles. You look at the start of their career and where they end up, and there's a massive evolution.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was lucky enough to have Castleman, the publisher out of Europe, reprinted. I think I have them right here, don't I? Oh, yes, I do. They reprinted at least five. I have five of Hergé's original Tintins.
You want to give us? You want to show us here?
Yeah, I was going to say, let me grab one here.
Yeah.
So we're used to the if you went to a bookstore today, you could find what he did was he did them all for magazine publication, and then as he became a better artist and a more assured artist, he redrew much of it, and the detailed backgrounds and the realism of his backgrounds and his settings with the cartoony characters against him that he became known for is a later aspect of his work. Let's see here. Can I find some good examples? Here's I got to figure out which way to do this. This is Castleman's Tintin in America, and I don't know how well people can see. I got to go this way, but
it's definitely a lot looser, a little bit more cartoony.
Yeah, and look, the backgrounds are very sparse.
Yeah,
and it's just an entirely different approach. The characters still look like the characters,
mm-hmm.
but his approach to the cartooning, sit this way,
yeah,
is just entirely different than the Tintin that we're used to. And so the evolution that Raymond goes through is, everybody has at different stages. If you go back and look at Jack Kirby stuff from the early 1930s, when he's a young artist just starting out, and you look at his work in the 50s and you look at his work in the 60s or 70s, you can see it's the same artist, but you see the evolution and the progression of the mastery that he builds over time.
Well, and even Raymond went through a number of evolutions himself. I'm going to pull up Raymond, Rip Kirby. I'm going to pull up Rip Kirby here, because just the difference between this stuff and this stuff,
absolutely,
is just incredible as well. Like, he went through a huge evolution.
Yep. Because by the time he came out of the Marines on the other side of World War II, and they said, "You're not going back to Flash Gordon. Why don't you invent a whole new strip for us?" And Rip Kirby is the result. He also, this is really the foundation for what becomes known as the photorealistic approach to cartooning.
Right.
That we see not just in Rip Kirby, but we see in places like Juliet Jones and Apartment 3G, and Stan Drake and Alex Kotsky and a whole school of artists following. Neil Adams in comics was, if you look at his Ben Casey's, there's a definite attempt to be photorealistic in that type of work. And so, exactly right, Raymond. And even within Rip Kirby, after he sets up his photorealistic approach and he's refining that, his work evolves throughout his time in Rip Kirby too, right up to his death. So, I just think it's a natural progression that people learn more, understand more, and figure out the range of possibilities, and then start to go off and explore them. And so that's how people develop their styles.
Another thing that you say in your essay is that the first story in here it takes a little bit of time for them to get going. It's not maybe it's not Hammett's usual style or such, and then the subsequent stories get a little bit better. But I have to say that I was hooked right away with the whodunit concept of the first story.
Sure.
I absolutely loved it. I think it was fantastic.
It's very, Hammett comes out of the pulps because he was a major seller to Black Mass magazine, which was, it became the leading detective magazine of that era. But and he created the hard-boiled, school of fiction within that realm, and he starts to move mystery writing away from the Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, um, you know, drawing room whodunits where you gather all the people, and then there's this sort of Sherlock Holmesian deduction that goes on. I mean, he sort of moves it onto the mean streets, and so he was of the pulps, but he was above the pulps in a lot of his prose fiction writing. He elevated the pulps with his work.
Yeah.
But he read the pulps. In one of the things that I found fascinating in the Selected Letters book is his daughter, who helped assemble the collection of letters. His daughter includes a letter where he talks about reading Doc Savage. When Doc Savage was published, every month as a magazine, it cost 10 cents, and there was a complete Doc Savage adventure and short stories in every issue. And so even though Hammett himself in his prose work wasn't really going to do that sort of relentless pace, short on characterization, hyper action sort of writing, when he gets the chance to do it, he gets a chance to do it in X-9, and he does a good job with it. It's
yes.
You could see the structure of this, especially this first story, because it takes 6 months for the first story to unfold, which is a long time in 1934 comics. But you can see the pacing of this story and the way the action goes from cliffhanger to cliffhanger, and the variety of cliffhangers. You could chart the arc of that story and pick a Doc Savage or a Shadow Pulp, or a Spider or a Phantom Detective, and you could arc that story, and those two arcs would look very, very similar. So this was a chance for Hammett to sort of indulge himself, I think.
At around this point, I think in 1935, Hammett leaves the strip, right?
Right.
And I think you can tell in some of these where there's it's overloaded with the dialogue. This isn't the same guy that's doing the...
Well, and because, again, Hammett had a taste of the grape, Hammett was not invested in comics. It was strictly a mercenary job for him. And he was also a little perturbed that King Features was slow on payment, at least initially, and they had given him other duties. He was supposed to help mentor Will Gould, who was launching Red Berry in 1934.
Right.
And Will Gould basically says, yeah, I never learned anything from Hammett. We would get together and we would just talk, and he would drink and he'd fall asleep, and that would be our mentoring sessions. And finally, Hammett just told Joe Connolly at King's Features, leave Will Gould alone. He doesn't need me. He's doing a fine job with Red Berry. So Hammett had extra work. They were slow to pay, and he was not invested in comics. And about this time in 1935, Hammett's last novel, The Thin Man, with Nick and Nora Charles as the protagonist, the novel had come out, and Hollywood came calling and said, we would love you to write the screenplay for The Thin Man, and we'd like you to write a sequel to it as well.
Oh,
and
nice.
So let's see, Hollywood money, which is big bucks, and even was back then, and a lot less work. And oh, by the way, the California lifestyle was a lot more hedonistic, which appealed to Hammett.
Right.
So there was really no reason for him to stay. And as his work became less up to King Feature standards, it seems likely that in those later strips, his work is being rewritten to some extent. Some of us would say heavily rewritten, by some unknown staffers at King Features.
Yeah. Okay, well then tell me about a little bit about the last chunk of this book that is not Hammett or Raymond, nor
Yep.
Raymond.
Well, Hammett left, and did he jump or was he pushed? Stories differ.
Right.
Hammett would undoubtedly have said he went to Hollywood to work on The Thin Man. When he left, King Features put out a press release that said he was being relieved of his duties on X-9 because his comic work was not up to his normal standards.
Right.
Which is true. I am sure there's probably a little mix of both, in the true telling. But at any rate, he had left. So what were they going to do? Well, Alex Raymond steps in briefly, and as if he needed more work, he was writing and drawing the strip for a certain period of time. But that was a short-term gig. And so they cast around and said, who could we find? We'd like another name author, familiar to mystery readers, to help maintain the appeal of X-9. And Leslie Charteris took the job for a brief period of time. Charteris created Simon Templar the Saint, who most of us are familiar with, based on the 1960s TV show starring Roger Moore in his pre-James Bond days. But the Saint extends all the way back into the mid-1930s and was popular in a series of novels. And Charteris did not stay long because guess what? Hollywood came knocking again and said, we would like to start doing movies featuring the Saint. And Charteris became involved in the movies, and it became X-9 is not my character. Why am I going to stay with this when I can shepherd my baby into a different medium and a more lucrative medium even than novels?
Yeah.
And so things went on from there. And at the same time, Raymond's now established. Everybody has noticed him. And he decided he was really, Flash Gordon was the big winner out of the three strips he was doing between Flash, Jungle Jim, and X-9. Flash was really the one that was catching attention, and that was the one that interested him the most. And so he decided he wanted to step away as well. And so they wanted to keep his name on because by now his name was meaning something.
Yeah.
So they found some people who could, just as Raymond had ghosted for Lyman Young on Tim Tyler's Luck, Alan Dean came in first and ghosted for Raymond. And then later on, Austin Briggs followed Dean and ghosted for Raymond. And Briggs did some ghosting on Flash Gordon as well, and then ultimately takes over Flash Gordon when Raymond joins the Marines.
Right.
So there was this evolution away from the names that had launched it, or marquee names, and they opted instead for people who could look like Raymond, but who would produce more of a quote unquote standard King Features comic strip.
One of these people is Charles Flanders.
Flanders comes along because eventually they had to find, Briggs, Alan Dean got offered a strip of his own. He left. Austin Briggs wanted to be an illustrator, and in fact, ultimately winds up with a very successful career in illustration. He's a somewhat revered figure in the world of illustration.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to find a person to take over the strip, and Flanders is the first in a long line. Mel Graff does some work on it. Charles Robb did some work on it. And, over the years, some of those folks had a long tenure with the strip and started to humanize X-9, which is when you learn that his name is really Phil Corrigan, and he marries. It turns out it's his second marriage, as we learn in the third story in this book, second or third story in this book. There's one panel where X-9 reveals that he once had a wife and child who were gunned down by criminals who were, the bullets were meant for him, but his family took it instead. And so that's what helps drive him in his missions.
Yes.
And of course, that becomes, a standard sort of fodder. You can go all the way into the 1970s, and that's the modus operandi for people like the Executioner and the Destroyer and Marvel's Punisher. And in the pulps themselves, the Avengers from the late 1930s. Those are all, a standard motif. But at any rate, later on in the strip, Phil Corrigan marries again, and so that relationship, that familial relationship, carries all the way through into the 1960s with Archie and Al, and they bring her in when they need her, and when she's not needed, she steps off stage, and Corrigan has his whatever adventure he's going to have on his own. So, yeah, there's a strip that runs as long as X-9. Its own King Features was and is to comic strips what Marvel or DC are to comic books, and they own the property, and as long as they want to sustain the property, they're going to find people who will say, yes, I'll take this assignment for you.
Yeah, and there's usually no shortage of people looking for work. So.
Oh, exactly right.
Yep.
Exactly right. And sometimes that's a great thing. The people who come in afterwards, you can see all the way through. Look at something like Popeye, where
Right.
E.C. Segar is like groundbreaking, just brilliant. And then you have the string of people who follow him, but you can go all the way out to, again, another book, a mini series in our line. You can look at Bobby London in the 1990s taking over Popeye.
That's right.
And it is not Segar, but it harkens to so much of what made Segar's Popeye great, that it's different, but it resonates. And so, sometimes those types of things, when other people come in and take over, those are beneficial things. Sometimes, the successors can never equal the original creators, but you have your hits, you have your misses. There's winners and losers, and that's the way it is in life in so many ways.
I feel that Flanders is pretty good at approximating kind of Alex Raymond's style, but he doesn't push the envelope in terms of just the dynamic poses as much.
Oh, yeah.
He's a lot more stiff.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to, they want to try to retain the Raymond look, because that's what had built their success. And, they don't, you don't want to, strips want to evolve gradually rather than have watershed changes, because you don't want your editors to suddenly go, well, wait a minute, I'm paying you for something that looks like Alex Raymond. How come you're giving me something that looks like, how come you're giving me something that looks like George McManus? I don't want that. I want Alex Raymond. And so, you have to find people who are able to start out at least emulating their predecessor, and then evolve it into their own style over time. I mean, look at what Noel Sickles did for Scorchy Smith. I mean, right. Sickles was a natural artist. He was just as a teenager, he was brilliant. And his first success was to come in and take over Scorchy Smith from an artist named John Terry. And John Terry was, shall we say, let's not mince words. John Terry was an awful artist. John Terry, as my dad would have said, John Terry couldn't draw his way out of a wet paper bag.
Oh, man.
And Sickles' job was to come in and draw the strip like John Terry. And he did. Because at the time, Terry had gotten sick and they thought Terry might be coming back. So if Terry came back and Sickles' assignment was only temporary, then they wanted to have that continuity. So when Terry came back, readers would feel like they hadn't missed a beat.
Right.
Once it became clear Terry wasn't coming back and the strip was Sickles, then Sickles felt free to gradually change the look of the strip and evolve it into, the groundbreaking sort of work that it becomes. But it's just the nature of the world, people want more. They want that comfortable feeling. They want that more of the same, and it's the change is evolutionary rather than revolutionary is what most people are looking for in their serial entertainment.
In this book, why did you choose to include the Flanders stuff at the end there?
I think we were, more than anything else, we saw that we could sort of give a taste, two threads, I guess. Thread one, we could give a taste of what did the future look like for X-9 beyond where it had begun. And so there's that. Now that introduces that little flavor. And then second of all, just from a sheer production standpoint, by including that taste of Flanders at the end, we wound up with enough pages so that we could have a total package that would meet printers' specs and requirements. So it was a good package for the printer, and B, it would provide enough material to justify the price point that we were looking to put on it.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice. So, well, that's good to take that into consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, much as we do it for love, we can't afford to, the books that we produce have to sell at a certain price, and that means that you have to make sure you're giving value for money. And so that there's two sort of, there's always sort of two aspects of it. There's quantity and there's quality. So in this case, Flanders it's not like Flanders is a hack artist. Flanders is interesting.
Yep.
And so we were able to include the Flanders, get the pages in so we could give people the quantity of material. And as I say, Flanders is not a hack artist, and it does kind of indicate here's the next step for the strip beyond where we're going to leave it. And so we get, a good quality story in there as well, and something that gives people that sense of here's the evolution from Raymond to Dean to Briggs to Flanders to what goes beyond. So, it was as much a business as an aesthetic decision, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the price point says it's going to be this price for anything between whatever it is, 300 pages, 350 pages, you might as well push it to 350 pages.
Yeah, exactly right. Especially if you can do it and have a nice break point.
Yep.
We leave it here, and that's a good place to wrap up the book because there are no dangling threads, and we're not leaving in the middle of a story. And this was a self-contained one-shot package, so we wanted to make it as complete and as good a package as we could make it.
We have one comment from Bill. He says, fascinating. I could listen to Bruce talk about comics history for hours. There you go, Bruce. We'll have to have you back on the show again.
What do you, Bill? Do you have like a giant bottle of no-dos next to you?
No, it is great because the way you explain it gives us the context of what the syndicate was up to at the time and the decisions that were being made for. It's just nice to see the larger scope of what's going on in newspaper history that directly affects the way that this comic strip is being dealt with.
Well, and this is something when I have to explain my job to to the average person who doesn't know anything about comics, who looks and goes, "Wow, all those comic book movies! That must really mean your stuff must be selling like hotcakes." No, doesn't affect us at all. But
Oh
when
yeah.
I talk to those people, it's one of the things that I say I have to explain is the goal of the work that I do, and people like Cheat Here and Little Orphan Annie, or Jared Gardner over in Skippy, or any of us. The goal is not just to be able to say, here's this cartoonist or writer and artist, if that's the combination that's out there. It's really to set a larger historical context, because especially in the 30s and 40s, especially, America was a nation of readers, and comics and those cartoonists were popular. They reached tens of millions of people every day, and the cartoonists really were celebrities.
Hmm.
And so that all of that can't exist in a vacuum. The what is going on in the world and the experiences of the cartoonists affect their work and affect the content, and the strips themselves are so popular that they affect the larger culture. And so there's this dual loop between comics and the rest of the world, and you have to be able to get a sense of all the puzzle pieces to see how the whole picture comes together.
Right.
And so that's something I think we all try to impart to readers, is the larger sense. And one of the, I won't say frustrations, but one of the things that I'm aware of in reading today is that when in other areas where maybe these things aren't covered to the extent that we cover them, there is a tendency in a certain segment of the readership, of the larger cultural readership, to take a look at something from 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago and apply today's standards to that material.
Yeah.
And yes, the fact that characters were in comics, in movies, in radio, the fact that there were characters, for instance, that were presented in blackface, it was never right. There is not, there is no societal excuse for it, but it was accepted at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you can criticize an artist or a creator for working in an environment that his audience is going to understand. I mean, I have pointed out in the past, and probably will in the future again, over in like Terry and the Pirates, Milton Caniff was a deep student of the Far East. He'd never been there, but he spent thousands of hours researching and gathering reference and understanding. But he also knew that he was creating characters for an audience where for many of them, their experience with Asian with Asian persons or people of Asian descent was going to be their contact was probably Charlie Chan and Fu Manchu. So yes, so you wind up with Big Stoop and Connie, and they become a certain amount of comedic relief, and
stuck.
They evolve. If you read the strip, they certainly evolve beyond comedic relief, but they never can transcend their comedic, roots. But that was what the audience expected, and it's unfortunate, but again, we talked about cartoonists and people whose talent evolve. Society evolves. And we can't get to where we are today unless we were somewhere not as far along before. And we have to not accept it, but we have to understand that this is the way it was. Whether we say it's right, we say it's wrong, whether people at the time said it was right or wrong. That's what existed. And so, you know, part of what we try to do in our essays, and certainly I'll speak for myself, but I think I could speak for others, for Jared and for G and others, but I'll speak only for myself. Part of my goal is to try to make people understand the context of the times in which this material was created, not just within comics, but within society as a whole. And be able to say, okay, I can read it today and here's how I react to it. But if I went back in time and I was reading this for the first time in 1943, 1948, 1955, whatever, I can understand how my reaction might have been different. And I just think that's an important perspective. You know, when we're looking back at this material, we have to sort of be bilingual. We have to, we can only approach it from the background that we have living in the 21st century. But if we can understand enough about the times in which it was done, we can at least say we have a degree of appreciation for what it must have been like back then. Yeah. And you know, so that's, you know, I just think that's one of the driving precepts that, you know, I feel that responsibility to the readership to try to give them that extra level of understanding. How was that? Now, Bill, do you still say you could listen to me for hours after my jumping up on that soapbox?
Oh boy, yeah. Well, let's see. I think this is probably a good place for us to wrap up because it's almost been an hour for our conversation here, and yeah, I think that's a great place to pause, and we'll have to resume at another time. We'll get you back on the show to talk about another book that you worked on. Let's see here. We got another comment. Yeah, Omar Comics says it's like a time capsule. That's right. Yeah. Oh, last week, Jeet here and I talked about the book King of the Comics, 100 Years of King Features, and that is such a great time capsule. Like how it's divided up into different parts, and each part attacks the era of that decade and what's happening in the world and how it affected comics. It's just that's great stuff.
Oh, it was great fun to do, and everybody who was involved in it really just knocked it out of the park. I mean, everybody did a great job. It was, you know, there were a lot of contributors, different styles, different approaches, and yet the puzzle pieces really fit together really, really easily and really, really well. So that's a book. You know, I think everybody involved, I think, is really pleased and proud of that finished product. Yeah, it was just a tremendous a lot of fun, and the end product was really I just thought top notch.
Okay, Bruce, is there if people want to reach you or you're not online really at all, are you?
I'm a 20th century guy living in the 21st century. I am actually doing this on my wife's cell phone because I do not own a cell phone. and I do not have a presence on Facebook or Twitter. As Bill Belichick of the New England Patriots says, I don't do MyTube or Your Face or any of that stuff. I am on LinkedIn, but I am not active on LinkedIn. I'm only there because when it first started, a friend of mine who jumped on it said, "Oh, you should be on this." And I had no idea what it was. And so I put my name in. And so like once a year, I go on and maybe update my profile. And if somebody finds me there and says, "Hey, can I connect to your network?" I look at them and, you know, I check them out and try to make sure they're not, you know, just being capricious, you know, that they might. And in fact, there have been a couple that made me scratch my head, and I sent them back a note and said, "Are you sure you know who I am? And is there a reason?" And so they've said yes, because I've read this and this and it. Okay. But I'm not really a big social media kind of guy. I have to admit, I just don't know how people find the time because.
Well, I was going to say, it's probably nice that
there's always more to do than there are hours in the day to do it.
It's probably nice to not have that noise that we're constantly bombarded with because of it.
Well, and I have to admit, I have friends, you know, there are various controversies that swirl through the comics industry from time to time. Yeah. And I hear from my friends who are in social media. Oh, this group is saying this and this group is saying that, and there's these two opinions, and it's really dividing. It's creating hard feelings between X and Y, and I'm glad not to be part of it. True
Probably
story.
Smart.
20-second true story. As a young guy in my teens, I found out about the Comics Journal, and I said, "Oh, this will be great." And I found ways to get the Comics Journal, and I found that I couldn't read the Comics Journal because it made me feel bad about reading comics. And it was like, well, this publisher's no good, and this comic's no good, and this seller's no good. And it had a period where it was trying to elevate the discussion. I can look back at that now and understand it and appreciate it. But at the time, I would close an issue and go, why am I reading this stuff? And so I found that I had to step away from that. And in the social media world, from what I hear about it, it makes me say I would feel bad if I were involved in it, I think. So I just find it's best not to be there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know your own boundaries, and that's great. And
certainly, if people do want to get in touch, there's always good old-fashioned email, and you can always reach me at info@loacomics.com.
Perfect. There we go. Bill has one last comment. He says, "Many thanks for today's show. Would love to have Bruce back for a discussion on another subject. A show on the history of King Features would be most welcome." Bill, if you want to hear, I last week, Jeet here and I talked about that about King Features, and didn't go into maybe as much detail as Bruce would, but I kind of gave a nice overview of that. We also have a comment from Stephen. He says, "I wonder if Bruce worries that appreciation of the comics medium and its history will die with our generation of codgers who remember reading daily paper."
I like to think not. I'll give you a quick answer because I know you want to wrap, Curtis. But
yeah,
I like to think not, because nothing ever fully dies. The days of the Wild West are long behind us, but if you still want to find a blacksmith, you can find him. For a long time, turntables were, what is this? And what are these things, 33 1/3 albums on vinyl? What is this? But guess what? Vinyl has made a return, and turntables are out there once again. So nothing ever really dies. And I like to think that with the academic focus that's being placed on comics these days, that there'll be a degree of exposure, and that however whether it's going to comic shops and saying, oh, this looks interesting, whether it's through academia, whatever, that people will find their path into the medium and do what I did, which is, there's a lot more out there. What else might I be interested in? And start to go and look around, find our stuff, and pick the things out of it that interest them. So I like to think that not only will there be other generations who have a degree of interest in this material, I like to think that there will be people who will continue to do the type of scholarly work that Jared and Jeet and folks like us have been doing, and that they will learn even more than we have learned, just like we learned more than Bob Harvey and folks from his generation did. We all stand on the shoulders of our predecessors, and I think there will be people who will come along and stand on our shoulders too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and there's more and more people every day. Like comics in general is becoming a wider, more accepted genre and medium, just in terms of acceptance in public.
Yep.
We don't get beat up for reading comics in school anymore, or my kids don't, at least. The comics are.
I got sent home in the 3rd grade because I brought 2 Spider-Man issues for reading time.
You rebel, you.
I know.
And now my kids' classrooms, they have a graphic novel section in their class. Each classroom has their own little section in their library with graphic novels in it. So those kids are getting a taste, and when they get a taste, when they become more mature readers, and they start to experience comics outside of Bone and that kind of stuff, then they're going to find all of this stuff here. And
right, that we have made accessible, and not just us. Charlie Pelto over in Classic Comics, the Fantagraphics. Yep. Everybody knows who all the players are.
Yeah.
all of us have built a path and to this material that 20 years ago really did not exist. And so, all of those folks deserve a chance to take a bow, because whatever future is out there and whatever segment of the populace is going to stay interested in this, we've built a path that's going to make it, I won't say easy, but make it accessible for them to be able to find the material. And so, I just think that I think it's important work, because Harlan Ellison, the late great Harlan Ellison, would say nobody quite knows the full count, but there are only a very small number of art forms that are truly have their origin in America, and comics are one of them. And comic strips predate comic books. And so it's important that we don't lose access to this material. And so, all the people who have been involved in preserving this material have really, I think, served an important, not just within the industry, but an important for the larger culture, an important function.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there we go. On that note, let's say goodbye, Bruce.
All right.
Thanks, everybody,
Take
for
care.
tuning in. We'll see you again. I think actually I'm on vacation next week, so we'll be back in 2 weeks, and I hope to have Dean Mullaney back on my show to talk about something that I don't know what we're going to talk about yet. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.